So we're going to move to the next portion of today's agenda. And so we will be set up for a panel. As you read and heard, this panel will be focused on OST leadership, particularly by folks of color, Black women who are leading programs and organizations in our coalition, in our community, in our provider ecosystem, as we call it. And we're going to be joined by Telesha Mervin. We're going to have Erin, and we're going to have Rose. And we're going to spend about 20 minutes with them, have a couple questions for them to respond to. And I think as we get ready, one thing I'll just mention is one reason we're doing this is because as we've just kind of reflected in the first half of this meeting, and as we all know and have lived, this has been a very challenging time, right? And so the concept of leadership and the concept of organizing and having a vision and helping others along through tough times is critical in this nature of work. We heard about challenges around staffing. You know, we heard about challenges, my breakout group, around how salaries can also be a real barrier or a hurdle to get over in terms of getting other staff on board. How do you keep morale up, right? There's all these questions that we went through and still continue to, but really, you know, at the pinnacle of the pandemic, you know, people out and families asking questions and having to change ratio and trying to stay in accordance with licensing, self-care and self-care of your team and of your community and your program. This is what leaders do. On top of that, you know, as a man of color, I also understand there's a real legacy of oppression that folks of color experience. We all, you know, feel it differently and move through the world differently, but as much as the time was a pandemic based on COVID, we also know there are other kinds of pandemics in the forms of racism and other isms that really are heavy and affect us each and every day. So these three women have weathered the storm, if you will, and the storm's still out here. And that's a big reason why we want to bring their voices front and center today. So let me go ahead and put the question out there that we're going to start with for all three panelists. If you could just take a brief moment to introduce yourselves. And then our first question is, can you reflect on your role as a leader and as a Black woman in the community? How do you incorporate healing into your leadership for yourself, your staff, and your children, as well as families in your program and community? So a brief introduction and then talk about your role as a Black woman in the community and how you incorporate healing into your leadership for all involved. Ms. Rose Francois.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rose Francois. I am the Interim Executive Director at Enroot, where we empower immigrant youth to succeed academically, professionally, and personally. This is a very loaded question, I'll be honest. When I think about this, I immediately think about the image of the strong Black woman who is not stressed, who has no worries. But the reality is it is tough. And so for me, it is important to fill my cup. It is important to put my oxygen mask on. And so healing is taking a step back, resting, knowing that it's okay to rest. It's okay to be vulnerable, making space for that. Creating space to process a lot of the work that we're doing. Also doing the same for my team, making sure that they know it's okay to rest. Burnout is incredibly real. And so sustainability is what I'm always thinking about, making sure that we are not burning ourselves out. Something that Ty said that stood out to me in our small group was hurt people hurt people. How we present to our students is very important. So if we're not balanced, if we're very stressed out, if we're burnt out, our students will see that, they will receive that. And so it's incredibly important for us to take care of ourselves, for us to take care of our community by healing ourselves first. So that really resonates with me. And I think that's the best way we can be kind of united in this front of healing our communities.
Thank you, Rose. Why don't we pass it to Telesha? If you could hop on this question as well. It's in the chat, and I know you all had a chance to preview them, so I won't read it again. Thank you.
Sweet. So Telesha Mervin, I'm over at Kennedy Community School as a director. I also am a facilitator and trainer for Gender for Children. This question for me is beautiful, and I welcome it. Today, I remind myself to take off my cape is how I start my day. I feel like I am viewed as Superwoman, and so I behave as such, and often forget that I am only human and that I don't have to do everything. And I'd like to pair Rose's comment with healed people heal people. And so as I have begun my journey of healing and loving and pausing and celebrating others and celebrating myself, I do the work. So I don't just think about it, I put it into action. And how I do that is I take the time to celebrate my staff. I celebrate them in front of the students. I celebrate them in front of their peers. I celebrate them in front of families, because I need them to know that we don't just pull people aside to say positive things and say negative things outside. We need to teach people how to heal, how to love and support each other outwardly. And that's the only way to change it. It can't be done publicly. We also have to humanize the process in which we live in and acknowledge that, hey, today I feel sleepy, today I feel tired, I'm hungry, a little annoyed, but I'm making it, I'm pushing it through. I'm very transparent with my staff, and I allow them to be transparent with me. And that's how the healing starts. Often we don't heal because we're hiding. We're hiding behind something, we're hiding behind what we're supposed to be and what we should be, instead of who we truly are. And when we recognize who we truly are and what we bring to the table, then we can do all of the healing, all the love that we need to move forward. And that's what I have to say for today. Thank you.
It's wonderful. Thank you. So far, so many themes of strength, of being, I think, in some ways, stepping into a role, maybe sometimes beyond what it is for yourself. So in a selfless way, I'm almost hearing showing up every day, not just for yourself, but for others as well. Erin Muirhead McCarty from the Community Arts Center, hop on in. Thank you.
Yeah. I was shaking my head to a lot of what was said. I think as I reflect on this question, I often, when I think about these questions, I realize that I carry a lot of people with me. And so I often think, particularly because I come from a mother who was so interested, like before people were doing DNA tests, was so interested in genealogy. And so knowing where I came from a Black woman who came from a Black woman who came from a Black woman, as Rihanna said recently, I'm very connected to that lineage. And I know some of the storms that have been weathered. And so I think you carry that with you. I know there have been more recent studies about the epigenetics of that, but I carry it in every cell of my body. And so I recognize that when I'm feeling certain ways, or I start to personalize an interaction in a certain way. I try, I think, to not allow people to project onto me because I am very certain of who I am. So I don't allow the projections of others to sort of sway me. I stay the course. But I was just talking with Melissa. We had a great conversation in our chat. I gut check myself regularly, which is something that I think I expect and hope others in my circle to do as well. I think that people who don't gut check themselves are often, you know, you in your one of your other slides, you talked about acknowledging your privilege and having privilege. If you don't gut check yourself, I think that you are a victim of your own privilege. So I gut check myself regularly. I agree. One of the things that I always think about is just because she carries it well doesn't mean it's not heavy. And I think that a lot of us carry heavy stuff with us, and we do it well. And so people dismiss the pain or the trauma or the baggage or the stuff that we're dealing with often, because a lot of us have learned, and I find myself in this weird space generationally between these younger Black women who are so vocal about the oppression and the pain, and like a generation of people who learn to navigate this stuff in a more secretive way. And so it's an interesting space to kind of fall into. And I think about that a lot as well. But going back to some of the stuff that I was talking about kind of with Melissa, we talked about that gut check, and that I think being a real part of Black leadership is that we are often in check or just very sensitive to the spaces that we're in. Having been in spaces where you've been overlooked or disregarded, I'm always very sensitive to looking out for the underdog. I'm always bringing people along with me. I stand in solidarity with people. When I think about leadership, I don't, I think about that Audre Lorde book about the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So I don't aspire to take on the attributes of, what was her name? Sheryl Sandberg had that catchy little campaign a few years ago where it was like, I'm not bossy, I'm the boss. And it was like sassy and cute and all of that, but I don't aspire to be either. I don't aspire to be bossy or the boss. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed your acronym about build, understand, inspire, love, demonstrate, because I do feel like to be a good leader is to stand in solidarity with your people, to listen, to always call back to your humanity. And those are the things that I value. And I don't, to be a leader is kind of like, it's like to be classy. You would never call yourself classy. Say something that someone says about you. And I think it is important to inspire and motivate and listen and always go back to your humanity.
Thank you, Erin. So we're going to do another round. As you can see, we're getting the realness here. And I really want to appreciate these Black women for taking the risks of sharing in the way that you are. I'm hoping folks are taking pause to understand what we can learn from what's being shared here. Okay, sometimes it's something we take for granted that other people have different perspectives. This is a chance to really hear some of these perspectives. So this next question actually could be a very long journey that you could take us on with the answer. So I'm going to ask you to truncate it a bit, just take a couple of minutes and reflect on the two parts of this question. Okay, so I'm going to read it. It's in the, actually I'll put it in the chat. Okay, how would you describe your current thinking about issues of identity, bias, and equity? And how has your thinking changed over time? How do these themes intersect with your views of what it takes to be an effective OST organizational leader? So we can go in the same order or mix it up. What y'all want to do? Telesha, you gonna jump it off? You're on mute if you are.
I can't, there we go.
Thank you.
All right. That's what I get from moving my lips. Okay. So this question for me is loaded, and I'll do my best to rein it in by just addressing some of them. So I think that the identity piece is so huge, and it has changed the way that I move today. So the idea of someone with my particular background being in the field that I'm in and doing the work that I do, I didn't think was possible, because I was just told that, you know, if you grow up in a certain neighborhood and if your life is a certain way, you know, if you don't have your parents, like, how can you aspire to much in that? And so the biases of learning disabilities and so forth had me cap myself in a box. So I allowed someone to create the box, and then I held the lid down. And so that limited myself in my journey. And then in terms of being a part of this community, I have learned to understand what is equity and what is access, and how to bust that box open, the lid and the sides. As a matter of fact, I no longer live in a box. I live on a flat plane, so I can run and move about as much as I want to and how I want to. And that's how it's changed the work that I do. And I also am aware of the boxes that I create around other people. And I'm also the force that comes around and breaks down the boxes that someone else created around somebody else. I don't stand for that. No one's allowed to box anyone else in. I often tell my children, you are not allowed to hurt anyone, and no one is allowed to hurt you. You are allowed to apologize, to grow and move forward. And that's the only thing that's accepted here at our program. And so that is the same thing I say to staff, to myself, and to others. We all fall short because we've been taught different things and in different ways, but that doesn't mean we have to stay that way. The point of growing up is to change. So when someone says to you, you have changed, you should say thank you. There's no reason for you to still be the same as you were when you were 17, 18 years old. If they're not able to accept that change, you just move around them and say, come if you will, and if not, praise you, I'll be here. You know what I mean? So I think that, yes, the biases, identity, it has really shifted the way that I teach, the way that I grow, and the way that I love on people, regardless of their intersectionalities. It doesn't matter to me. I refuse to allow them to be boxed, and I refuse to be boxed. I don't want to stand out here alone, so I'm bringing everybody I can with me.
Thank you so much, Telesha. Someone else want to jump right in, please do. We'll go to Rose then. Yeah, all right.
Yes. So this, I really had to think long and hard about it. And I would say right now I'm very focused on outcomes. And I think my thinking has shifted from giving resources to, if students all have the same laptops, why do they have different outcomes? And really asking questions about what are the experiences of students and how does bias play a role in that? It's also really important for me to dive into our own organization's biases. There's a lot that we need to unlearn as well. And there are toxic elements in nonprofit work. There's hustle culture. There's a lot of things that we can bring unintentionally to our work that we need to solve for internally. And I can say personally, I'm an immigrant who works with immigrant youth. The impact that that has on me, on my team as well, cannot be overstated. It is refreshing. It is wonderful. The impact that it has on the youth to see me, to see other individuals in this position cannot be overstated. I also think it's important for us to be radical in our focus on equity, on dismantling white supremacy, on being anti-racist. And the things that we talk about as being radical often are not radical, they just make sense. And so being very honest about that is incredibly important for me, and challenging others in a way where we are inviting people to the table, but the shifts need to come. And I think this is the time. So that's really where I am right now.
So many gems. I'm going to move to Erin, just in the name of.
Yeah, no, I'm shaking my head during a lot of this. Yes, a lot of the things that seem so radical have never been all that radical. Saw someone in the comments say that. It's very true. I think when I think about issues of identity, bias, and equity, sometimes I get frustrated when we're having these conversations, because for so many of us, these were discussions that we had like before we knew words. So I sometimes have to check my own frustration and my patience. Those are things that I've had to work on when I think about how my thinking has changed over time. I have become a little bit more patient than I used to be. I'm a little less reactionary than I used to be. I see the benefit in bringing people along rather than calling people out. And that to me is the most important thing. If you can get someone to really change their perspective or understand the gravity of their the impact or the potentially damaging impact of things that they're saying or doing, it's much more effective to have someone get it than to call them out. So I think my thinking around it has, I just moved a little differently. I'm definitely not as confrontational about it as I used to be. I'm more likely to pull somebody aside and have conversations with them. When it comes to our children, Telesha is on the mark with that. I mean, I have always been around Black creatives, and so they've never been boxed in by what society tells them they should be doing or how they should talk or how they should move. And it's really important to me that I embody that with our young people. It's never about, again, people projecting onto you how they think you should move or speak or talk. And so that's important. And, to Telesha's point as well, I try to build that into the space at the Art Center as well, because even when I'm looking at applicants for jobs, I'm not always looking for the most credentialed person. Sometimes I'm looking for the person who gets it, who's going to be the most effective in that role. And it's not always the person with the PhD who has aggregated all the statistics and analyzed all the data and all of that. Sometimes it is the person who's just got their head on right and has some great lived experience that has taught them about people. And so I think a lot more about that. I'm a lot less impressed with people's sort of achievements and credentials, much more impressed with who they are as people. But I'm definitely more patient.
Coming across. Thank you, Erin. And to your second to last point, which you just reaffirmed, your patience as a virtue, so important. What people's lived experiences are, we know that's the business we're in. We're trying to provide experiences. We're trying to make sure there are opportunities for a range of lived experiences to not be boxed in, to not be, labeled and belittled and told this is where you belong and this is where you should stay. Or this is where you were from, so you have a different sort of identity because you're here now, right? In terms of an immigrant experience or a so-called minority experience. So again, much appreciation.
Also, can I just mention, it's also important to note that there are very different lived experiences amongst Black people, and especially in a space like Cambridge, which is heavily immigrant. And I do think that's worth noting. Like my experience is of descendants of slaves from the South, migrating up through Chicago. That's a very different lived experience than the child who came from Haiti and had to deal with other issues. And it's important to note that when we're working with our young Black and Brown students, but there is also a thread, a commonality and a thread that binds us. And so I hate when I see those divisions being stoked.
Thank you for making that point. It's that tension or that rub or that reality that, yes, we're not a monolith and there's not one story, and yet there is something that does bind us and needs to keep us together and collaborative and a community. I mean, part of the whole strategy is to box people out and to put us in our own lanes. And, you know, our young people and our families, right? They have different experiences. And unfortunately, sometimes that's a common theme for folks of color. So I just want to, again, thank you all. I just feel so appreciative of being able to spend some time with you and to be able to make a space for you all to share your wonderful thoughts and reflections, learnings, and your leadership with the rest of our coalition here today. And for those watching after this is recorded, I'm sure they'll benefit just as much. You all are amazing Black women. You also are amazing OST leaders. Let's just, you know, give them their flowers, as they say. So I see it. The chat's lighting up now. There we go.